Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our today's lecture will be on colonialism and indirect rule. And the objective of this is to explore the dynamics of British colonialism in Nigeria, and then we'll focus on the system of indirect rule, its implementation, impact, and the lasting effect it has on the Nigerian system. Colonialism, we should note that started or happened between 1861 to 1960, and then that was a transformative period that reshaped political, social, and economic structures of Nigeria. While indirect rule also was a hallmark of British administration, leveraged existing African governance system to maintain control with minimal resources. So basically this lecture will examine the origins, mechanisms, and consequences of indirect rule in Nigeria with a focus on its regional variation and long-term implications. To begin with, what is colonialism? Colonialism is the practice of controlling territories and peoples, profoundly shaping Nigeria's history through British imperial policies and the implementation of indirect rule. Additionally, colonialism can be seen as the practice of one country establishing control over another country or region, often through military conquest, economic domination, or political manipulation. This control can be direct, where the colonizing power governs the colonized territories directly, and can also be indirect, where local leaders are allowed to govern under the supervision of the colonizing power. British colonialism in Nigeria happened in three different contexts. We have the pre-colonial Nigeria context, then the British entry itself, and then the motives for decolonization. For the pre-colonial Nigeria context, there is an involvement of diverse societies ranging from Yoruba kingdoms, House of Lani, Emirate, and then the Igbo village democracies. There was also complex political systems with centralized and decentralized systems such as Igbo, and then there was also involvement of the economic systems based on trade, agriculture, and regional networks, e.g. trans-Saharan trade. So throughout the early 20th century, Britain expanded its rule, leading to significant economic, political, and social changes, including the introduction of indirect rule, which reshaped local governance across the region. The initial contact was actually via trade with the Royal Niger Company in 1886, thus with respect to northern Nigeria, and then the missionary activities. There was also the formal colonization, which began with the annexation of Lagos in 1861, as earlier mentioned, and then until the period of amalgamation of northern and southern Nigeria in 1914 under the leadership of Sir Frederick Lord Lugard. There was also the motives for colonization, which we know have actually shaped the activities of the colonial masters in the area we call Nigeria. There was, for instance, the economic motive, which gave them access to resources such as palm oil, groundnut, and cocoa, and then a lot of market within the hinterlands of the area we call Nigeria today. There was also another strategic motive, which include competition with other European powers, e.g. France and Germany, regarding access, number one, to raw materials for their companies, and then the expansion of power towards other regions. And there was also an ideological motive that has to do with civilizing mission, which was tied to missionary and imperial ambition. So, in essence, we can simply say that these are the three key contexts or factors that actually shaped what we can call colonialism and today in Nigeria. The pre-colonial Nigeria, comprising of diverse societies, the complex political systems, and the economic system. And then the period of the British entry into the area, and then the expansion into the hinterlands, consisting of initial contact via trade activities, and then leading to formal organization, and then the amalgamation period of 1914. Remember, the amalgamation of 1914 was only the final amalgamation, but there were amalgamations practices that have taken place prior to this one. For example, the 1900 and then 1906, and then the final one of 1914. And for the motives, the reasons why the colonial masters even annexed the area, was there was economic motive reasons, there were strategic reasons, and at the same time there were ideological factors. On the other hand, what is an indirect rule in the colonial context of Nigeria, particularly regarding its application in the, and successes in the northern part of the country? Indirect rule was a system where British authorities governed through local leaders, maintaining traditional power structures while imposing colonial societies on the Nigerian population. This approach allowed the British to maintain control with minimal resources, leveraging existing political systems to enforce order and extract resources from the regions. The effectiveness of indirect rule varied across Nigeria, with it being successful in the northern part while being unsuccessful in the other part of Nigeria. And it influenced societal dynamics while fostering both resistance and collaboration among local populations in response to colonial government. So the system was actually developed by Lord Lugard, first implemented in northern Nigeria, and then was later extended to the rest part of the country. Indirect rule has a number of principles, such as maintaining existing local governance structures to reduce administrative cost, and also empower traditional rulers as intermediaries between the British and local populations. And then another principle was actually minimal direct interference in local customs, provided they aligned with British interests. The rationale for the adoption of indirect rule include cost effective, that was limited British personnel and resources, and then maintaining stability, leveraging legitimacy of traditional rulers to minimize resistance, particularly from the areas it was successful. And then cultural sensitivity allowed some continuity of local traditions under colonial oversight. Indirect rule was implemented in the three regions: northern Nigeria, western Nigeria, and then the eastern region. Uh, in the northern Nigeria context, Sokoto Caliphate was a very centralized and then hierarchical emirate system under Usman Danfodio. So the application of indirect rule in the Sokoto Caliphate was highly successful due to alignment with the existing structures. Emirs retained authority over local governance, tax collection, and justice systems, while British resident officers supervised emirs, ensuring compliance with colonial policies. And also, Islamic law, that's the Sharia system that was used to govern the Sokoto Caliphate, was largely preserved in civil matters. Consequently, there was a minimal resistance because it strengthened emirate authority under British protection. In the western part, that was a Yoruba-dominated area. The system there was semi-centralized kingdoms, e.g. we have Oyo with Obas or kings, and then there was an indirect rule partially, the indirect rule actually was partially effective there. Not as successful as it was in the northern part of the country. Traditional rulers like Obas were co-opted, but faced resistance when authority was actually altered. In the eastern part, that's the area dominated by the Igbo. The system there was actually acephalous and highly decentralized, and based on the nature of the egalitarian societies, with no centralized rulers. So indirect rule was actually problematic in that area because the British appointed warrant chiefs, often without traditional legitimacy, and that resulted in resentment and resistance. Um, the indirect rule has actually had numerous impacts on the Nigeria political system. But here we restrict ourselves to number one, political impact, economic impact, and social impact. For the political impact, it strengthened centralized authority in the north, but then disrupted traditional governance in the east. It has also created regional disparities in administrative development, that's north versus south, because the system differed, and then also there was a limited political participation, stifling the growth of modern democratic system. For the democratic institution. For the economic impact, there was a shift to cash crop economy, e.g. cocoa, groundnut for British market. And then there was introduction of taxation system, e.g. hard tax, enforced by traditional rulers, often causing local discontent. There was also infrastructure development, e.g., railways, and that served colonial interests, not local needs. For the social impact, missionary education created a new educated elite, particularly in the South. And there was also tensions between traditional rulers and emerging nationalist movement, and then cultural erosion in some areas due to imposition of foreign system was actually noticed, e.g., the activities of the warrant chiefs. So therefore, we can say that indirect rule has actually transformed socio-political structures in Nigeria while empowering local leaders at the same time undermining traditional governance, leading to a complex legacy of authority and resistance, particularly from the indigenous or local people in the country. It has also increased the vigorosity of the political control, particularly by the colonial powers, and then the economic exploitation, cultural imposition, as well as social hierarchy were all increased. So, therefore, we can see that the impact of not only the indirect rule but the entire colonialism can actually be seen in the economic underdevelopment to some extent, and then the cultural loss, social and political instability, as well as psychological impact. So this is the brief, and whoever has any question, he or she can simply contact me via my email or via the class WhatsApp platform so that we can have more explanation on the LMS or any other platform available. Thank you.